Hi, welcome back to Headbangers. I'm here with Nathan today. Join us, Winterfylleth.
It does kind of make me smile internally a little bit to think that, you know, we've got Bloodstock Festival and Brutal Assault Festival still booked that aren't cancelled at this moment in time, and that our album launch show, you know, 15 months after it came out, might actually be at Bloodstock. So
Yeah.
Well, we'll probably, hopefully we'll see you there because we've got tickets for that. So if everything goes out well, we'll be there in the crowd with a beer, seeing you guys. So
well, I hope it can
fingers
happen.
crossed.
Yeah, we've always had great times there, so that'd be an interesting platform from which to do the first album show a year after it came out, which is an oddity. Definitely.
Over a year, yeah. Will it be, it'll be about 14, 15 months, won't it, after the album came out?
Well, I think the first single came out mid-February 2020.
Yeah, it did actually, didn't it? Yeah.
So yeah, it's been quite so we're over a year now since we launched something from it. So yeah, a strange platform to do an album from, but nevertheless, it came out and people liked it. So let's hope they still remember it's our new album and that we've not done anything with it yet.
Yeah. I genuinely thought it was incredible.
Yeah.
I've given it a couple of listens. I was like, what really strikes me as you as a band is like you kind of mix like these brutal sort of like black vibes, but then you also have this just huge atmospheric feel. How do you sort of like go about juggling that? Because they all flow so well, and I think you guys as a band are like almost a perfect example for other bands to sort of look at and go, okay, if I want to do something like this, I should sort of focus on trying something like this as well. Do you know what I mean? Like it flows very well, and it's got a lot of sort of thought process into it as you listen to it. So how do you really go about it, right? You know, with writing and stuff like that to make it not like just flow.
So it's an interesting question. To be honest, it's kind of hard to sort of unpick your creative process and tell somebody about it because, you know, you just kind of write how you write. I don't know if that makes sense, but I don't think that lots of people sound like us, and I don't think we sound like lots of people in certain ways. Obviously, you know, you could say it's black metal from listening to the album, but having played with a few different guitarists over the years, not many people play like Nick and I. And I think that the way we've kind of sort of self-taught over many years and kind of come through playing for myself, playing in, you know, like Death Doom and Funeral Doom sort of stuff, and then kind of progressing onwards from there, the tunings and the types of guitars and the approach into and moving out into black metal. I think that kind of lends itself to that kind of flowing thing that we talk about. You know, I suppose partly that's to do with my my OCD as a writer a little bit, that I don't always love things that are really choppy and kind of go all over the place. And I think some bands kind of rely on that as an aesthetic, and they kind of almost thrive off that chaos. Whereas I've always been more of the school of thought of write one good riff and then write another good riff and then write another good riff and make sure they all kind of go together in a way that keeps things moving and has a few twists and turns and some dynamism, but that makes sense, and it isn't just a kind of, I don't know, the 50th riff you hear in like 22 minutes, sorry, you know, like, don't get me wrong, I love all kinds of like chaotic death metal and all sorts of things, but if you, for example, put a Winterfylleth track against, I don't know, like something off the latest Morbid Angel album or something off like an Ulcerate album or something, you know, you've got some really contrasting styles of sounds there, and how people approach songwriting and what they see as that kind of landscape. And I think for us, and obviously Simon can speak for himself in terms of the drums, but I think we've always been of the opinion that things need to breathe, things need to kind of grow naturally, and that you need to kind of to play to the atmosphere rather than overplay and overfill the space and kind of be too technical for what we're trying to do. So there are kind of perhaps self-imposed restraints we put on ourselves in some ways, but I think it just comes at the heart of it from trying to write, you know, songs and riffs that we like and that kind of go together and make sense together and create that atmosphere. And obviously playing the guitar is part of it, but you know, that underlying desire for it to just be no filler, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's the key thing, isn't it? Like, I think when we're writing new material, one of the most important things that we always talk about is hopefully you don't mind me using a bit of mild swearing now, is having like a decent shit filter. So, it will come out with a lot of material, but then being able to filter out what's mediocre, what really works or not, is something that I think we've always been very conscious of, particularly Chris and Nick, and knowing what our identity is as a sound as well is something that we've always been very, very sort of hot on. And we all listen to all sorts of different like music, no matter the genre, but we know what we're supposed to sound like, what we want Winterfylleth to sound like, and we stick to that quite rigidly. And I think that's important. And people kind of, you can listen to a song and people know it's us immediately because that's like the trademark Winterfylleth sound. And, like I say, we love all sorts of different, black and death metal and all sorts of other genres of music. And what works for somebody else doesn't necessarily work for us.
Yeah, it's interesting what you said as well. That there's not an overly use amount of brutality if it doesn't need to be there. Like, it's actually quite a therapeutic experience to listen to Winterfylleth, to be honest. Like, I can sit there just like study or do whatever I need to do and just have it in the background, and it's like it sends you into a bit of a trance, really. So yeah, I think like it all flows very nice. It's not like you don't add parts in just because it needs to be there. You put the parts that just fit right to make this the songs go smoothly.
Yeah, I think that's the idea. I think it's just not to overplay. And I don't know. I don't want to pick on any bands that kind of, I think, do that necessarily. But I just remember seeing some bands like that. There's this one band called, you ever see that band Into Armour play?
I've heard of them.
No.
Like, the drummer's like ridiculous. And I think he writes all the material. He's like a super crazy technical drummer. But I was watching them and I kind of almost forgot that they were playing and that it was just sort of like the drummer show. And and I don't ever want that to be the case with the sort of thing that we do. And obviously, like, there's nothing to take away from them. They're absolutely incredible musicians, and particularly that drummer guy. But I think when you present a band, to me, in some ways, that everyone needs to kind of be there, and stuff needs to kind of support each other rather than sort of dominate. And so, obviously Simon's probably a lot more technically capable than some of the stuff that we do on the records, and maybe we are as guitar players, but you need to kind of give things space, and you need to give things the opportunity to kind of to harmonize together and to create that kind of, without sounding like a dick, that sort of sonic landscape, and that expansive sound and that kind of wall of sound that comes from Winterfylleth tracks, and it not be just sort of dominated by one thing. Because, like, if you hear a record with like snare drum that's like 100 times louder than the rest of it, or kick drum that's louder than the rest of it, or the vocals are really up front, you just sort of forget what else is going on. And I think that's when you kind of sort of don't appreciate what the band has done and what songs have been written, because you focus too much on one thing. So I hope we try and kind of think about writing records as people that listen to and kind of critique and understand and appreciate other people's stuff as well. It's
about balance and space, and writing music with a sense of balance and space. Particularly, I mean, that's quite literally when we're like mixing a record is an important thing. Obviously, lots of bands think about that, but lots of bands, I think, get it wrong. And I'm not saying we've got it perfect, but I think, particularly with our new record, we've been really happy with the mix we got out of that. And quite literally talking about balance, the balance that we've got really emphasizes, I think, that space between the instruments. And another thing we've always been very conscious of is using almost like restraint in songwriting, and not going too fast, or not going too slowly. Just again, it's that kind of trademark sound I guess we've all like created for ourselves. But that idea of restraint, and one of the most important things for us, and this does sound massively cliched, as a bit of a muso cliche, but the space between the notes is often as important as the notes themselves. That does sound very cliche, I know, but it's really true.
It doesn't. It is 100% true, because, like, like if you listen to an album, it's also about leaving a lasting memory on the listener. at the end of the day. Like, it's that's what amazes me about you guys, because I've listened to your newest album today and over the last couple of weeks, and it is amazingly relaxing, as well as like sort of like it does take you off guard with some of the brutal sections, but you've got such a unique sound and it proper stands out. And it's clear that you've all put in so much thought into how you structure your music.
Thanks. Yeah, it's appreciated, and I'm glad you guys noticed.
And also on the back of that as well, before this album there was an entire folk album. So what was like, I can also see like the influence of that kind of feeding over to the new album as well. Like, do you ever intend to go down that route again? Like, just going like dropping the black metal for another album and just going down a different musical route? Like, what was the thought process behind going and making a full folk album, and then what's kind of the process for the future maybe? Like, would that be something that'd be reoccurring?
I mean, like, never say never, obviously, but when I think about that album in the context of our other albums, then that's our sixth album. So we've done 5 kind of full-length albums and splits and compilations and other things around that, and a demo, obviously, in the years before it. And so we'd always kind of explored acoustic songs and folk ideas on the albums. And I don't know, like Nick, who plays bass, but he's also a really great guitar player. He and I were sort of living together at the time when we wrote that album, and we sort of thought about maybe just kind of doing something while we were kind of in each other's company and doing some acoustic stuff and kind of writing stuff together while we had this sort of space and time, and maybe just putting it out as like an EP or something, of our own.
Yeah.
Not being Winterfylleth, but actually, as we kind of came up with stuff and the sort of themes and concepts really seemed to fit around Winterfylleth, and obviously it making sense as something that a black metal band can do. Then, as I've said in interviews before, we got the other guys involved reasonably soon, and started making it into a full-length album. And I think we wrote 15 or 16 songs for that album, and maybe 12 or 13 kind of made the final thing. And then we did a few extras that were going to be on Reckoning Dawn, the newest one, but we left them off because they just were the wrong feeling. I think that Reckoning Dawn is really kind of epic and quite powerful and upfront, and one of the more immediate records I think we've made in a long time. And we'd done quite a few nice acoustic tracks that I just don't think fit in there, so we wanted to leave them off. So there are a few things kind of kicking around that are sort of semi-finished and that we kind of put down in the studio. So maybe we'll do something again. Maybe we'll put, I don't know, a bonus EP on something, or maybe we'll do something else. I don't know. But ultimately, it was a kind of a nice experiment to do, to prove to ourselves, I think, that we could write something that had the atmosphere and hopefully class of our other albums, and it be cohesive and not just like my first folk album that some guys think they could make, and actually it kind of compete and be regarded as something important within the English folk scene, as well as a black metal album.
Exactly. It's still got that Winterfylleth DNA in it there, even though it doesn't have some of the black metal elements in it. It still sounds like you guys. And obviously, like I said, it carries over to the new album as well. Like, I can definitely see you took some elements from that and applied it well to the new one.
I think so, yeah. I mean, it makes sense for bands like ours to do it. And even though it kind of put a few people's noses out of joint for some reason when we released it, it's not like they were the first band that ever did it. Simon's wearing a Bergtat Ulva t-shirt, are you? And or is it
It's a Nutens Madrigal one, but
so obviously they made Kveldsanker before that, and that was their second album, doing a full kind of 35-40 minute folk album. Other bands have done it, October Falls, and they just released one last year, Sis or Sice, however you say it.
Imperium.
Drudk have done one. It's not like it's out of the realms of possibility that bands like ours could do it, and it makes sense. So I just think it was something that we wanted to do, and I'm glad we did it. And I think it really shocked a lot of people that we aren't just two-dimensional, black metal sort of thing, and it's actually there actually is a depth and a knowledge to our songwriting and our abilities, and I'm glad we were able to show it.
And it wasn't like a gimmick decision either. It was something we'd spoken about for a number of years, and again, we all listened to a lot of atmospheric folk music as well. So it's a genuine, interest and love from us as listeners of music as well. It wasn't just like, oh, we should try something different now. It was always on the cards. There's always been tracks like that on pretty much every single Winterfylleth album. So it did seem like a really natural step for us, I think. And what was really great about doing that, it allowed us to play some really interesting concerts around the release of the albums as well, in venues that we wouldn't normally get to play in. So some like really historic churches, the Cheetham School of Music in Manchester, which is we performed twice in their medieval baronial hall, which was just absolutely incredible. Amazing atmosphere during those shows. And we got a few of the session musicians in to have a cellist, violin live with us, and they were all candlelit. So it was a really atmospheric environment for that music to be played in. And it's not like it's something we couldn't do like a normal show. Like you wouldn't see us, like, I don't know, playing Rebellion in Manchester doing that. It wouldn't fit at all, or wherever, so it was really great to be able to play some interesting different places that had a really fascinating history of themselves. So like the Cheetham School of Music, where we performed in the baronial hall, the kind of area that they'd allocated us for our dressing room was directly behind the baronial hall. And it was used by the Elizabethan alchemist John Dee as his living quarters when he was the provost of Cheetham School of Music. It's one of the oldest schools in the country. It goes back to the medieval period, obviously. And he lived there. And there's a famous bit of folklore around John Dee when he was living there, because he was an occultist, so to speak. He allegedly summoned the devil in this room, and there's this oak table in the room, which is still there today. In fact, our rider was literally put on it. And there's this scorch mark in the oak on one of the corners, and it's in like a hoof shape. And the story is that he summoned the devil, and the devil scorched this table with his hoof. But I think in reality, he probably had a few too many beverages of an evening and probably tipped his candle over, burnt the table, and then had to make up some story to the people that he was renting the rooms from. I summoned the devil and the devil burnt the table. So we were getting ready to perform live, and there's this table that John Dee summoned the devil on in our dressing room.
It doesn't feel right that there was like 40 cans of lager on it, does it? Or whatever it was.
So, like, obviously you guys write a lot about Anglo-Saxon sort of history and lore. Would you like classify yourselves as history buffs? I guess it kind of goes without saying. But would you, what kind of like interests you about history in that way to like write a lot of music about it?
I mean, that's quite a deep question for a limited period video interview, but I guess my main feelings on it are, as I've spoken about in lots of interviews over the years, it's not just something limited to now. Well, Simon and I first met years and years ago, probably getting on for 15 years ago or something, over a kind of a mutual passion for English history and folklore and some of the kind of historic, national sites in the country and things like that. So I don't know. I guess we've kind of, our knowledge has kind of progressed along with the sort of the trajectory of the band, and we've become more and more interested in it as we've gone along. And it's one of those things that's hard to kind of put into context for somebody if they kind of don't have that passion as well. But essentially, it's like anything, I guess. If you sort of see value in it, and particularly when you're in a band, there's obviously a huge value in narrative and storytelling and the ability to kind of put context onto things. And I think the way that we've tended to use the kind of Saxon history, particularly, obviously not limited to that, but we've done a lot of stuff around that because of the kind of the way that it's documented and written, and the kind of poetic, almost like lyric-like way it's written. I think what's interesting for us, and what we've always done in Winterfylleth particularly, is this idea of, I guess, like trying to use that history and kind of bring it into the modern world. So when you kind of study this stuff and read around it and see the kind of stories and narrative and tales that those people are writing down and telling, it's almost quite interesting to see how we haven't really changed much as a species over the millennia, and how they still kind of fight those struggles, and how they still kind of go through those turmoils and battles and power struggles and ideological struggles and all those kinds of things that we see reflected in society today. And whatever sides of those debates you're on, I don't think that should kind of put you off listening to some context about it and trying to kind of galvanize your own opinions about it. Because one of the things that's always concerned me, not going off on a tangent, is this kind of inability we seem to have in the modern era to engage in meaningful discourse with each other and sort of talk about ideas and gain consensus rather than this kind of shouting backwards and forwards at each other, which seems to be the kind of the mainstay for modern interaction, particularly through social media. So we've always tried to have quite a measured approach to it, and to put kind of some context around these stories and to try and bring them into the modern world, as I say. So, there's a famous quote, talking about, how can you know where you are if you don't know where you've been?
Yeah.
And I think that lots of people will kind of talk poorly about use of history of black metal and talk about, it as being a negative thing, or want to call it all sorts of names. But actually, I think it's a really important thing that many of those people probably don't really even know the history of their own countries, never mind like the history of others and all the sort of things that have gone on. So it's kind of partly educational, partly kind of really interesting as an aesthetic for lyrics, and just a really fascinating time period that I think is misunderstood or not very well known amongst people in this country, and something that's worth sharing and keeping alive, and is unique. We're all kind of sort of taken in by the fantastical and fantasy, I guess, elements of things like Norse mythology, and everyone loves the kind of Norse runes and the kind of stories of Fenris and Thor and all this kind of stuff, and Woden and all that stuff, all those kinds of things. And yet there's equally interesting stories and unique rune rows that exist in the British history of that, and lots of it's sort of shared European history, but there are kind of little sects of it that exist within the UK or Ireland or Scandinavia or Central Europe. And actually, I really like it when bands are themed around that, because it's not just the kind of done to death, hail Satan, yay beer, kind of exists. And so that's why we've themed our band around it, because we're genuinely interested in it, and it's pushed people's buttons, and I think people have misunderstood some of our intentions at times, but you can't account for everybody's taste, can you? And I don't think you should try. So we are who we are, and we're very open to kind of talking to people about it.
Another thing that's I think quite important about it is the fact that for us, as English guys, it's authentic. That's what we are. It's our history. It's what we authentically are. We're not trying to be some kind of parody of like Norse black metal, Norwegian or Swedish or Finnish black metal, or wherever, whatever. It's our identity. So that's what I think one of the most important things when I'm listening to music is, if a band has a sense of authenticity about it, it makes them, it puts them on another level, I think. Certainly, no matter what that is, whether they're talking about history or whatever. So I think that sense of authenticity is very important. And what's more authentic than your own history?
No, absolutely. And I think, especially what you said as well, like Norse mythology, all the Satan and the beer stuff, like it's so being overdone. Like there's plenty of bands that are already doing that. So I think it's good to have like you guys doing it about English history, because as much as I can think, I can't really think of many other bands that are doing that. And obviously black metal is a good template to base that on, and it goes well with the topics. So also on the lines of that as well, like, as a black metal band, do you ever face like sort of judgment from the fans or other people? Because I guess with black metal, some of the fans can be quite judgmental if it's not like the 90s Norwegian black metal, and especially being like an English black metal band. Do you ever face any of that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess so, you know, and I'm sure there's probably people that talk, you know, negatively about a band, and well, you can't count for everybody. You certainly can't please everybody. If you think about the history of British black metal, it didn't really exist very much before bands like ourselves and Fen and Woden's Throne and A Forest of Stars kind of came along and started doing it. So
Yeah.
it's really kind of strange to be told by somebody who thinks they're a purist for black metal, that you aren't doing what they consider to be black metal. But given that there wasn't really that much black metal from the UK, how do you know what UK black metal is unless we've come up with it?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think there's that side of the coin to it as well. I'm not, by the way, I'm not saying we invented it, you know, but you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
there wasn't very much history of it before 5 or 6 bands, you know, around us kind of started doing it. So I think we've had to kind of almost create an identity for it to some extent, and certainly with our endeavors, I hope we've kind of put the UK on the map a little bit for this kind of style of music. And I know that if I think back to sort of 2006-ish when we were starting, you could count the amount of UK black metal bands on 2 hands probably. Whereas now, you know, there's some page on Facebook that somebody joined me to that's the UK past, present, and future or something, and there's like 600, 700, 800 bands on there, and that's probably not all of them. And you know, that's only within what's that, 10 or 15 years, you know. So I think I don't know. You just can't take criticism for everybody. If they want to just listen to Burzum and Mayhem and that's good enough for them, then fine, you know. They don't have to come to Winterfylleth show. They don't have to buy a Winterfylleth record. But equally, we're huge kind of historians and fans of this kind of music ourselves, and it's not like we haven't got the providence to be you know, allowed to play this kind of stuff. So you know, look behind me, like that's just my CD collection, you know. So
That's a massive collection.
it's not my vinyl collection, which is equally as big. So not that necessarily having a huge CD and vinyl collection makes one an expert. You know, it's we're people who are into this music as well as people that play it, and we're not just some like numpties that have come off the street that have just decided to kind of adopt black metal and think it's a cool thing to do for a few years because our hardcore band didn't take off or something.
And we've literally all been listening to black metal literally since we were teenagers. So, you know, it is what it is. And talking about UK black metal as a resurgent genre from like the mid 2000s when we were getting going, it's funny, isn't it? Because all the history of second wave black metal in Norway and Scandinavia is amazing, and we all love that. That's fantastic. You know, some of the most iconic, greatest bands came from that genre-defining era then. But people forget that black metal actually is an English invention in the first place.
I was going to say that with Venom.
Venom, you know, Venom in Newcastle in the 80s. You know, that's funnily enough, I was listening to a really great podcast with the old drummer of Cradle of Filth, Nick Barker, who's a friend of ours, and he's a hilarious guy, really funny guy, and he did a podcast with Alan, the singer of Primordial, and it's a great listen. Not to distract your listeners from your wonderful podcast channel, but I'd recommend people go and listen to it because it's got some great tales about Cradle of Filth when they were first starting and when Nick joined Cradle of Filth and his kind of origins in like UK thrash bands in the late 80s and so forth. And it's funny, we're talking about like the kind of elitism and issues people have had with black metal bands from the UK, but when he left Cradle, he joined Dimmu Borgir, and he talks at length in this podcast about when he was first going over to Norway to rehearse with Dimmu, and they'd be in the pub after rehearsals, and you know, they used to get so much shit for being in Cradle of Filth, you know, because they were the English black metal band that didn't have the kind of credentials of the Norwegian bands. And all these people that kind of gave him shit he'd be in the bar with them in Norway and he'd be like, well, I'm here now. Thought you said you were going to kill me. And you know, he's this big hooligan from Chesterfield.
Tell you what, you wouldn't want to miss with that fella.
No.
He's a man mountain, isn't he?
Thoroughly nice guy and an incredible drummer, absolutely legendary drummer. So yeah, there's a massive heritage of black metal in the UK, and it's right that there should be a strong black metal scene in the UK, I think.
I think it's ludicrous that he got criticised, for going over being with Dimmu Borgir and from being in Cradle of Filth, when Cradle of Filth and Dimmu Borgir are quite simultaneously similar in the sort of orchestral sort of elements to it. So it's quite funny just how that prejudice comes with it. But then obviously, like you said, black metal came from the UK with bands like Venom and Merciful Fate and stuff like that. So yeah, it's always a bit hypocritical when newer black metal bands get criticised for being from a different country.
Yeah.
What can you do?
Merciful Fate from Denmark, aren't they? But yeah, that whole era. I know what you're saying. That era of black metal, that first wave of black metal. Bathory, Hellhammer, Celtic Frost, and so forth. Yeah.
But it just feels strange to me that someone would kind of give you shit about being in a band from the UK, like. I'm not from 1995 or from Norway, therefore I am not burged out by Ulver, so I've got to be what I am, which is, a guy from England writing songs about my history. So,
Yeah.
I think that to me that feels pretty authentic. But if you don't agree with it, well, there's lots of other bands you can buy.
Yeah, well, that's what I find crazy about it when people like almost go, because if you want to get technical about it, technically the UK invented metal in general. So if anything,
yeah.
we've got the biggest say.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
You think about lots of the major genres, even some of the kind of ones that I don't like as much. You think about lots of dance music, lots of indie music, metal, punk. It's all from the UK originally. I mean, it might have been done better other places over the years, but our little kind of island nation has not done terribly badly to represent itself on the international scale with music. So I don't know. It feels strange that people would think negatively of black metal bands coming from here now.
Yeah, it's crazy to think. What sort of on the kind of subject, like what sort of do you think kind of spiked this new kind of rise in black metal bands, either from the UK or in just general? Because I've noticed quite a lot of bands are almost going for a blackened vibe when they've been doing new releases and stuff like that. What do you think sort of sparked it?
I feel. Go on, Chris. You
no, I don't know. I was going to say, what do you think?
I don't know. I think I'm going to be a bit of a pessimist here, and I'm going to veer a bit away from the whole black metal, the pure black metal scene. One thing I've noticed over certainly the last maybe 5 years or so is bands from other associated genres, whether it be death metal, even a lot of like the kind of, more fashionable metal, hardcore crossover stuff. They started to adopt a lot of the same kind of themes and a lot of the same aesthetics when it came to like the way their artwork would be designed, the way certain merch would be designed, even logos and stuff like that. And these bands wouldn't sound anything like how black metal is supposed to sound, but they kind of, it's almost like co-opted the kind of aesthetic of black metal, because I guess black metal, it's got such a reputation. Everyone likes to have a dangerous reputation, don't they? So I think it was co-opted as a bit of a trend, a bit of a kind of fashionable thing for a lot of bands that probably didn't have too much of a connection with the genre, aside from it looking cool to them and people thinking it looked cool. And that's fine, things, we're grown up enough to kind of shrug that stuff off, and people, these trends and fashions go in phases, and I'm sure a lot of these bands just grew up a little bit and stopped wanting to, sing about childish subject matters that they were covering, particularly in the death metal sort of side of things, or well, certainly some death metal bands anyway. Not naming any names, but and I think black metal had more of a sophistication about it, so it it was accepted as a kind of I don't want to sound too elitist saying a higher art form, but I think it is, personally. In my opinion, it is anyway. So I think those themes were co-opted by a lot of other genres. Bands using almost like runic logos, very very big bands. Very big bands using like occult and runic symbology, and that's fine. It's free world, isn't it? So
yeah,
that's what you say about authenticity. Though, like, not everyone would view that as being kind of authentic, and I think that's where perhaps some bands kind of fell down with it. So,
I also think it's to do with black metal. You can almost mold it in sort of any other way, and in quite well. Like sort of like I'd say the base level of black metal. Like you're talking like when it initially came out, you're talking Mayhem and all those other bands. The base level, I think that you can just sort of add anything to it, and it can almost, if you craft it well, it can sound pretty well done. I think that kind of attributed to it as well.
And I think the internet's got a lot to answer for with it as well. I think that the kind of explosion in black metal, it's pretty much run parallel with the explosion of the internet. And I think what was quite an impenetrable genre beforehand, like if you were getting into black metal in the early 90s or the late 80s, you had to be basically already really entrenched within the kind of tape trading scene, like death metal and thrash metal tape trading scene, to be discovering these bands. You weren't going to discover them any other way other than tape trading. And the only people that were getting into black metal then were those people. And I think that was very much the case until probably the mid-90s, when, things became more popular, communication was made easier. And certainly with the explosion of the internet, it just makes black metal, which is still quite an elitist, impenetrable art form to get into. It's quite attractive in that sense to a lot of people. A lot of people, they want that. There's a curiosity there that people want to explore, and I think that's what's contributed to it. And obviously, you get some people that like it as a bit of an edgy, fashionable thing, and you get people that get into it at a later stage, and they genuinely love it for the right reasons, and that's great. That's fine. And people are always going to like stuff as a fad kind of thing. Doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I think it's gone into like the mainstream as well. Like you had that awful Lords of Chaos movie come out recently, and that there's a lot of conversations about it in mainstream media as well. Like me and Brad went to go see Lords of Chaos. It was a fucking terrible film, but
yeah, I've not seen it. I've kind of refused to watch it, just because I just didn't want it to. I didn't want it to like almost like tar my own love of that period of black metal. And I think what was better, what was really really good, is that documentary that came out on Norwegian TV that was really well made. A bit after, I think it came out last year. I watched it through the lockdown. Can't remember what it was called, but it's about the whole history of second wave Norwegian black metal, and it covers all those things which have been well covered in the past.
Even stuff like that. Even stuff like that, Until the Light Takes Us documentary is really great.
But that Lords of Chaos film, I won't be watching that.
We gave in. We were like, should we just go out, get pissed, and watch it, and have like a bit of a laugh? And we were just shit-faced in the cinema watching it, and like it was just so terrible. Like it was one of those where you couldn't break through.
I just can't comprehend it. Like it's got the guy from Home Alone's brother or something, or cousin or something. It's kind of guy in it, and you just think like, I'm sure if those original guys, in fact, I'm sure if those original guys saw it, they probably want to just set it on fire. But I'm sure I half saw an interview with what's his chops from Mayhem, the bass player,
Metro Butcher.
Just
Yeah.
like fuck that thing, man. You know,
Yeah.
it's just how can you talk about a band like that?
Yeah,
Oh
absolutely.
yeah. So that Norwegian documentary, it's I should have remembered because it's named after obviously the famous shop. It's called Helvet: History of Norse Black Metal, and it's a mini series on Norwegian TV. It's all, you can watch it in. I think you can download it off YouTube because it's not available in the UK to watch, and you have to download. Somebody made a subtitle file for it, so you can watch it, and you have to download it all. But it's well worth watching. It's really, really well made, and it's really like kind of. It's got interviews with lots of really key figures in it, and also some figures that aren't always in the mainstream kind of conversation about that period.
They interview the guy from Thorns in it, who's
Yeah. So
like invented that style.
exactly. So Snorri from Thorns is interviewed throughout, and he's probably he was my favourite part in it because I love Thorns. You know, we all love Thorns, and he's basically credited with inventing the guitar picking style that Euronymous then went on to use to write De Mysteriis Dom Satanas, because he was hanging out with those guys, and he and Euronymous would sit down and write riffs together, and him and Euronymous developed that guitar picking style, and it's amazing because the documentary really digs deep down into the real roots of that second wave of black metal. It's the most authentic kind of TV thing I've seen on the subject, definitely.
I'm definitely going to watch that.
Out, yeah. What do you think you guys, think it means to be like black metal? Because it's almost like compared to like death metal and thrash metal, which is just a musical genre, it's almost like a sort of stigma behind black metal. This is what it is to be black metal. Like, not just talk about the corpse paint and stuff like that. But what's your guys' take on that?
What it is to be black metal?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if we can answer that. I'm sure lots of people probably don't think that we are. But for me, it's about it's about the atmosphere that you create with the music, and I think it's about the presence and the aesthetic that you create with the words and the imagery and the whole concept of the thing. Thinking about our own band, when we were sort of starting Winterfylleth and talking about the idea of history and the idea of folklore and I guess English black metal or whatever we call it, then it was I not necessarily conscious, but like we definitely didn't want to kind of go down that kind of corpse paint, black and white, chains and bullet belts and spikes kind of thing, because it doesn't. I don't know. In some ways, it doesn't belong to us. And even though we love those bands, I think when you're a band that's come along, whatever it would be, kind of 15, 20 years later than some of those original, De Mysteries and early Burzum and early Enslaved and all those kind of things that were out then, it doesn't make sense for us to try and parrot that back to people, as I've said many times before. And I think that corpse paint and all that kind of aesthetic was those guys' reactions to the death metal scene at the time, the sort of social narrative that was going on for them at the time, and their reaction to their situation. And I don't know, us trying to co-opt that is a strange thing for me, really. And I always wanted it to be a bit more about who we are and where we're from, and the kind of the flowing landscapes of northern England for me, or the rolling kind of Malvern Hills for Cy, and the idea of this link between history and the modern world, and it meaning something a little bit different,
I think one of the key elements for any black metal, no matter what the subgenre of black metal, is that to be defined as black metal, there has to be an aura of mysticism about the music, and I don't mean that in too much of an esoteric way, but there should be a mystical element to that, and whether that's us talking about folklore of the countryside that we all grew up in, or whether that's guys from Norway talking about walking through a forest in the middle of the night and the kind of spirit that instills in them. I think that's kind of along the same sort of lines and the same kind of feeling, but just expressed in two different ways. And I think it's that essence of mysticism that's key, that you don't really get with different forms of metal or whatever, whatever the subgenre. And I think that's key, and I think that's where some bands that try and do it as a gimmick fall down, because they don't have that authentic sense of mysticism about what they're doing.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Definitely. I suppose as well, like another kind of good jumping point would be, is there any other influence that you kind of want to put into your music, that you've always sort of wanted to play about with?
So stylistically, I don't know. I think it's kind of fairly clear to me now what Winterfylleth sounds like. And while I don't just want to kind of release the same album every 2 years or something, I think that we've always tried to do little bits of incremental stuff that makes it different and interesting and keeps ourselves interested. But I don't have ambitions of us, doing an Ulver, say, and kind of putting out an electronic album next.
That would be a shock.
And kind of going down that route or something, even though we do like some of that stuff. But
yeah, that stuff's amazing.
Yeah, not to kind of talk down about it, because I do really like some of those records. But I don't have a desire to kind of make a really huge left-hand turn in Winterfylleth and do something crazy like that. I think if I did, then I'd just make another project. And some of us, and most of us actually, have been involved in other projects over the years, and some with other members of Winterfylleth and some without, and you sometimes need to kind of express other things. But I don't think your main band is the medium to always do that. And while I think the folk thing fit really nicely into that, which is why we decided to bring that into the Winterfylleth environment, I don't think we have any great ambition to do a Viking metal album or something, or a kind of a kind of pirate metal album or something. You know what I mean? It's not within us to want to do that kind of thing. I think there's other subject matter that we like to cover lyrically, and obviously there's the kind of prevailing social narrative of the day that we like talking about, and I think there's lots of unexplored elements of our own history that we still got left to talk about. So I don't think there's ever a kind of a lack of subject matter to kind of bring into the music. I think maybe the only thing I'd like to try stylistically is perhaps some more expansive tracks like we did on our 2016 album. There's a track called Green Cathedral, which is one of my favorite Winterfylleth songs, but I think it's also one of the ones that's maybe a little bit on a tangent from the kind of main sorts of sounds. So if I think about our albums over the years, there's a song called A Soul Unbound, which is on Threnody of Triumph. There's a song called A Careworn Heart, which is on Divination of Antiquity, and then there's Green Cathedral, which is on Dark Hereafter.
And Forsaken in Stone, of course.
And yeah, Forsaken in Stone as well, on Divination of Antiquity as well. And I think those songs play around more with it, being a bit more languid and a bit more kind of expansive on the sound, and bringing in some of the more, I don't know, like space between it, like Si was saying. It's not just kind of blast beat and riff. It's letting the songs breathe and kind of building layers, and it almost being, I don't know, a bit more sort of doomy in a way, I guess, and it having a kind of layered building approach as opposed to it being quite riffy and immediate. And I think that I would perhaps like to do a few more of those expansive songs, because I think we found some of our most interesting and emotive moments on some of those songs, particularly like the song Green Cathedral for me, which remains a highlight. There's kind of solo kind of halfway through that, where I think we really kind of found this wonderful atmosphere on that. And the song, you can almost imagine sort of being stood at the base of a waterfall with the kind of the water crashing there, the sort of description of the words, and just feeling like, I don't know, there's kind of a sort of spiritual element to it. And I guess the idea and the concept of that song Green Cathedral was about finding spirituality in nature rather than in the kind of confines of a church or religion, and how nature can probably be equally or more so kind of spiritual to you than not. So I like some of those concepts, and I like the idea of sort of doing a few deviations that kind of that play into that space a little bit more. But let's be honest here, Winterfylleth is a atmospheric, emotional black metal band that likes to kind of play with those sorts of moods, and those goosebump inducing moments, and those kind of Punch to the Sky choruses and those kind of memorable riffs and that kind of that feeling that you get when you hear a record of ours. We're still chasing that, and I think we probably forever will. And I don't think there's anything kind of untoward about doing that. As I said, I don't want to keep repeating ourselves. And if we get to that point, then maybe we'll have a word with ourselves. But I feel like we've always had quite a good shit filter, and that we've always tried to make the best records we can. So I hope we can kind of continue doing that, and whatever twists and turns come with that. And as well, we recently got a new lead guitar player, Russ.
Mm.
So whatever he's going to bring to the mix now when we start writing again, I think will undoubtedly sort of take things in some slightly different directions as well. So that's probably no bad thing, and long may that continue, I guess.
Absolutely. Obviously, like with Winterfylleth, there's like an element of escapism. Like, is that something that would you say is the most reoccurring element of Winterfylleth? Is that something that you'd like people to sort of feel immersed in your albums?
I wonder if escapism is not quite the right term for me. I do get that. I do get the sense of what you're saying. I think for me, it's more about I don't know. I don't know if it's about immersion or if it's about atmosphere. And I think atmosphere in lots of different senses. Obviously, atmosphere in that it gets broadly described as atmospheric black metal. But I think sometimes you can kind of make 7 or 8 or 10 or 12 minutes kind of melt into seeming like a few because of the way that you kind of structure tracks, and you sort of bring people into this kind of time vortex with the way that you kind of craft songs. So I think that's really immersive, and I think it sort of brings people into it. So through that atmosphere and through that emotion, I think it can really kind of pull you into a strange sense of being. So it kind of distorts your time and kind of and sort of gets in your head, and I hope that's kind of what we do. And I think that's for me one of the feelings that I'm chasing with writing the music. And again, when we're sat in the studio and we do some of this stuff, and you kind of get the raised goosebumps and it gives you a bit of a chill. It's not a cliche to say that happens, often for some of the stuff we're writing, and I like to think that other people feel that, and that's where I come from anyway with it.
I think if we can make people feel like that they're traversing a lakeland fell in horizontal rain, then I think we've done our job.
It does have that effect, to be fair. Yeah, it's like definitely puts you into like a trance. Like you just sort of like you zone out, but you feel like relaxed, but it's also like engaging at the same time. It's like a weird sort of like you said, like a void that you're in. It just kind of take you away, so and you can be looking at the album cover and the art, like you feel like you're there. It's just very interesting.
I'm glad you feel that. In fact, there's this one comment by a guy whose name I recognise, but I don't really know, that was on the video for Hallowing of Erdom, the title track of our acoustic album, and he posted something saying, I remember sort of standing, as a kid in the kind of shadow of the northern English moorlands and fells, and I've never found an album or a song that kind of sort of puts into context that feeling for me as well as this did, and that really meant a lot to me, because I think we probably grew up in the same environment, and I think we were probably both looking out across those same landscapes from our kind of childhood homes, and sort of feeling that imposition of those kind of strange, scary, expansive and interesting landscapes, and to be able to catch that musically, and someone to kind of be able to picture that when they're hearing it, I think is a strange feat, and I'm glad we kind of have managed that for some people.
I think I don't mean to compare us to somebody as legendary as the late great Sir Edward Elgar, being a composer of music set to landscape. But that's what he's known for. He puts you in that place of from where I'm originally from, in Worcestershire, which is where I've now moved back to, having lived in and around the High Peak with Chris for 12 years or so. You listen to like a classic piece of Elgar, and he puts you in those rolling English hills, doesn't he? Rolling countryside of like the Midlands, and that was always our aim, was to make put you in the place that we're the Lake District or the Peak District or the the West Pennines, the Pennine Moors.
I'm sort of smirking listening to you talking about Elgar. Just thinking about us. We recorded a track which released as a 7-inch on our acoustic album, which is called Latch to a Grave.
Oh God, I
And
forgot about that.
and we recorded some footage of the band kind of playing in this church in the center of Worcester.
Let me give you the sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, Chris, but
Yeah.
there needs to be some context for this
Yeah.
church. So we needed to record a music video for the track "Latch to a Grave," which is a very somber track, and it's a riddle about a sword. I think you could probably sort of say it better than me, couldn't you, Chris? Like
the lyrical themes basically kind of lead you through like I sit by a king's side, a queen uses me to kind of knight people. I'm the kind of the opposite of the kind of writer's pen and all this sort of stuff, so you're supposed to kind of get through it and think like, who am I, what am I, and I'm a sword. And it's talking about kind of ancient poetry and riddles as a kind of a sort of a thing of many ancient cultures. So anyway, we did this video. We went to Worcester to sort of record the band bit of it. If you've ever seen it, there's kind of the sort of fight scenes with this kind of reenactment people we used, but the band bit of it is sort of sat in this church in the centre of Worcester.
Which is basically it's the oldest church in Worcester. It dates back to the 10th century. It was originally built by the Bishop Wolfston, who was then sainted, and he was the kind of guy that commissioned this church, and it's built on the it's actually built on the site of a pagan temple, which was an Anglo-Saxon pagan temple, and before that it was a Roman pagan temple, and before that it will have been a Celtic pagan temple, because often is the way when a culture comes into another culture and imposes itself on that culture, it takes all its holy sites and makes it into their own. So the Romans will have put their pagan sites on the Celtic pagan sites, and so forth, so forth. So this church is on a place of great historical importance in terms of religious history of the area, and it predates the immense, massive Gothic cathedral in Worcester. So it's an amazing place, and my dad has some involvement in the upkeep of this place, and he's involved with the trust that runs it. So he has the keys to this place. So we basically asked for permission to film the band performance bit in candlelight in this church. So we had all these candelabras around the high altar, and we were all like performing next to it. And so of course there's these like piano and keyboard tracks within the track. So our keyboardist Mark was down recording the video with us. And in this church is this beautiful old stand-up piano. And we thought, oh great, we can use that in the video. Brilliant. So we all, like there's 4 or 5 of us, lifting it up, dragging it across the church, put on the high altar, like candelabras on it with wax dripping off the candles onto the top of this like beautiful piano. And after we'd finished filming, we moved it back, and because we wanted to leave the place nice and tidy and leave it as we'd found it. And as we were lifting it down off the like high altar, one of the legs broke because we like dropped it. And we were looking at it, and it's like, what's the name of this piano? And it had the name Elgar on this piano. And like Edward Elgar and his family are from literally about a mile away from where I'm sat right now in the next village. Their family is from here, and they had a piano shop in Worcester before Edward Elgar was a famous composer, and they would make their own pianos and tune pianos and so forth. And they were involved in this church when they were, going about doing their thing. And this piano is one of the Elgar family pianos, like an absolute antique masterpiece.
And he broke the leg off it.
It was probably played and tuned by Edward Elgar. And we just dropped it and broke the leg, making the Latch to a Grave video. So if you go and watch the Latch to a Grave video, you'll see the Elgar piano in there.
This felt so
wasn't-
guilty, just like
It
breaking
wasn't
leg of it.
irreparably broken. I hated about it. It just sort of came loose a bit. You know.
Yeah, it was fine. My dad told me it was fine afterwards. So
Did you have to put some super glue on it or something? Just
Oh
pretend
no!
like
But
it was a big
honestly,
dust?
when we found out, because we just thought it was some like knackered kind of out of tune piano that was at the side of the room that Mark could just sort of sit by, and it looked kind of like he's the pianist, but he's not playing the video. Blah blah blah. But it turns out to be Elgar's, and we're all just like, for fuck's sake.
so there's us. There's us. We're all about history and heritage and honouring like our heritage, and there's us absolutely desecrating a piece of English musical heritage.
You just see like an article in Metal Hammer the next week.
So yeah,
Oh shit!
not our finest moment.
Well, as long as it's not another fucking article about Corey Taylor that they put out every day, that'd be probably.
Oh,
yeah.
me and Brad have ranted about that on the podcast like so many times. I said if you're a new band and you're fucking, about to release something and you're like, oh, this might get some attention, and Corey Taylor farts in the direction of fucking Metal Hammer, yeah, your album's not getting fucking covered, mate.
Honestly, today's like, I don't know. It just winds up. But just every day I'm sitting like, they just follow him around with like a tape recorder or something in a bloody iPad or something.
Oh, they
Yeah, I
seem
feel
to know
like
every
they
action.
need to. Someone needs to send them an email going, look, the shit that happens. You just don't always have to ask Corey Taylor about it. Like, maybe you should just, leave the guy alone for a little bit.
I think he needs to sit down for a while and have a beer.
Yeah,
Yeah,
chill
no.
out.
Imagine the Slipknot schedule. It's like, hang on, Corey's. We're gonna be 20 minutes later. Like, why? Corey's had 12 emails from Metal Hammer asking his opinion on lip gloss. I don't know why.
Don't get me wrong.
This morning.
There's some amazing people involved with that magazine, and I definitely lament the loss of the printed medium. Don't get me wrong, but when I see that every week, I'm just like, fucking hell, what's this guy to say now? Like, why does it matter? What's it for?
Yeah, it's almost like he's his own worst enemy.
Anyway, enough about that.
Metal Hammer's great. Like some of the people there that run particularly the more underground stuff, like Jonathan Seltzer, absolute legends. So a lot of time for him.
Definitely. One thing as well, like sort of on a different subject. What would you say is your absolute guilty pleasures in music? Like what do you sort of listen to? Opposed from heavier stuff and like metal and stuff like that.
Guilty pleasure. I don't think guilty pleasures exist in music. I think you can obviously be quite elitist about stuff, and I guess everyone likes to be. There's probably stuff that you listen to kind of coming up that still holds significance for you. That if you were to kind of say to somebody, "Oh, I'm really into this record," they'd be like, "But you're in a black metal band, or whatever." I don't know. I like all sorts of stuff. I'm a big fan of kind of black death metal and doom metal and stuff, but I also quite like ambient music and some kind of like cinematic stuff and jazz stuff. So I don't know if I've got any like huge clangers in my discography, like I'm really into kind of Drowning Pool or something. I don't think it's like that. But
me and you, Chris, we've really been binging a lot of ambient electronic music lately, haven't we? Like loads of great. Are they French, that label? Ultime Records. They put out really, really nice, minimal ambient electronic sort of stuff, and it's fantastic. I listen to a lot of it at work, and we've always all really liked ambient music anyway. I think that kind of ties in with black metal. Obviously, ambient music and black metal go hand in hand, like a lot of the more kind of like atmospheric traditional folk does. So yeah, a lot of ambient music, that ultimate stuff. That's really good. A lot of sort of ambient synth stuff that's more linked with black metal. That's great. A lot of stuff like that.
I'm just looking through my kind of like I've got my my sort of iTunes open on one side, just looking at what have I got that's like a real kind of like guilty pleasure. I don't know really. Like for me personally, I've been a fan of metal for such a long time. I think there's certain bands that maybe have like not kind of maintained credibility over the years, but did kind of amazing albums when I was coming up. Like maybe a band that might be considered like that for some people. I've always been quite a big fan of the band the Deftones.
Mm.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Even though that's, even though they're a big kind of mainstream metal band, I guess, I always do think that they always kind of maintain quite an odd and unique sound, and never really, other than a few sort of singles, ever kind of kowtowed to the sort of mainstreamness. They sort of became mainstream in spite of themselves, really, I think.
They're a weird one,
yeah,
aren't they? Because
definitely.
they were lumped in with that whole kind of new metal movement of the late 90s, but they never sounded anything like any of that
Oh,
stuff.
Yeah, that's what I always thought. I always saw it as like a misclassification, like just because it was in
Absolutely,
that time period. Like I feel like people lumped them. But when you listen to like some of their like earlier releases, it's nothing like it. Like you can't really put it on the same like level as Korn and stuff because there's like really good, intricate made songs in every single album they've ever made.
still the same now as well. Like I think Deftones have always had a unique sound, and I don't think anyone can deny that. Especially like Chino's vocal style. Like there's
Yeah.
not many people that try. Well, people might try and copy him, but he's definitely the first to try and do what he did.
And I
It's,
think, like, Steph Carpenter's guitar playing and that weird sort of style he uses with like those kind of weird augmented chords and that kind of sound.
Mm.
I'm not saying that kind of necessarily influenced me per se, but I think certainly when I was doing my other band, Atavist, and doing kind of more doom stuff, I was definitely chasing some of those weird kind of chord shapes and those weird kind of atmospheric sounds that they were creating on some of those early albums. So I don't think it's an oddity to like those bands, and I like them right from when I was at kind of high school and stuff, and kind of came all the way through, and I've always kind of had time for them. Despite the fact that everyone seems to think that band album White Pony's their best, where to me it's actually one of the least of their albums for me.
yeah, it's
Mm.
not one of my favorites.
I think it's their worst one, or certainly like up there. But anyway, yeah, I guess that might be a guilty pleasure of sorts for me, perhaps. Even though
I'm
I
trying
don't
to think
see it as that.
what I would class as a guilty pleasure of mine musically. I don't know. Enya.
Well, yeah. Yeah,
um,
I like bits and pieces of those. I was always a big fan of those early Radiohead albums, for example. Doesn't chime with a lot of kind of metal fans usually. Simon and I are big fans of a band called the Cinematic Orchestra. I don't know if you know those guys, which is kind of sort of like
that stuff's
jazz,
amazing.
kind of fusiony sort of stuff. And
Yeah,
I can see a lot of metal fans kind of hating on that kind of stuff. But to me, the drummer, particularly this guy Luke Flowers, is one of the most unbelievable drummers.
Unbelievable. Like
Like,
I'll sit at home rehearsing drums on my little electric kit I've got at home, and more often than not, like I'll warm up for about 45 minutes just playing along to stuff like Cinematic Orchestra,
Mhm.
and the drums are so technical. They're way beyond any like metal drummer. I mean, it's a totally different style. But
yeah,
I think one of the important things about being a musician is, you know, playing different styles of music to the style that you actually play is only going to make you a better musician. I think so.
Oh, definitely.
Not that I'm the best drummer in the world, but I try and expand my musical horizons drum wise and listen to lots of interesting stuff. I came across this band recently, actually. Chris, you might not have. I've been meaning to mention these to you, but this kind of technical proggy band, and I came across them because of the drummer, and the drummer's amazing. This band called Pliny, Plini.
all right.
And they're instrumental. There's like a bass player, guitarist, and a drummer, and it was really good, fantastic sort of technical, but still quite atmospheric music.
Yeah, that's that's what I like about them. Even though I like ambient music and that kind of stuff, I always like bands, not exclusively, but I always like bands that play around with atmosphere and find different ways of kind of
yeah,
chasing those same feelings that I think we're going for with our own music. And even though they do it in different ways, there's great albums by bands like Ace Dana, who've got a new album called Inks out, which is a really amazing kind of sort of slightly dance influenced ambient album. There's that band who got a hilarious name, Woob, Woob.
Oh, it's
They
really
got
good, that,
they
yeah.
got a great album called Lost Metropolis, which is somewhere between kind of like dancey ambient and kind of
Synthwave, isn't
sort of
it?
synthwave stuff. Yeah, and it's just like the way those guys are playing around with atmosphere using the kind of limited palette of instruments they've got. It's unbelievable. And I think if you're an artist that really wants to make an impact and do things that are interesting, I don't think you can just sort of think I'm only going to listen to Burzum and Mayhem, and that's kind of my palette of stuff.
It's good. It's funny though, isn't it? Because I know we spoke about Ulver earlier, and those first three the like trilogy, the famous three Ulver black metal related albums, even though one of them is obviously a folk album. They are legendary records, but I pretty much love most of their output.
I like the new album quite a lot.
Their new album's amazing. Yeah, I
Yeah.
picked it's fantastic. Do you know what? It wasn't as immediate as something like The Assassination of Julius Caesar, which is one of my favorite albums they've done in recent years. But it's become as good over time. It was a real grower for me. It's some amazing tracks on that record. And I think some of the newer Ulver stuff, no matter what kind of genre they play around with, they always sound like Ulver. And it's weird. It's like you said about our folk album. It's like you can listen to like Nathan's Madrigal or Bergtat, and you can listen to The Assassination of Julius Caesar or their new album, and you can still tell it's the same band.
Yeah,
and that's testament to them, and that's one of the reasons I love them. They're one of my favorite bands. Incredible band.
I think it's important, to like keep your sound. Don't be afraid to include elements, but never stray too far from the path. And I think, like you said with Ulver, they do that. Like with the new album, it still sounds like them, even though it might be like sort of a dark electronic album. I think it's because. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, I think that's because. I think that's again one of the things we were talking about before. It's because it's authentic. It's that authenticity. They're doing what they love and what they really want to do now. It wouldn't probably be authentic if Ulver just tried to do a black metal album now. Yeah. It's not what they want to do. It might be what we want to do. But
might be what we want them to do.
But to them, it's not. That's not them anymore, and they are authentically as Ulver is now, and that's what's. I think when bands force themselves to do something of a different genre, there's lots of bands that have done it, and you can see it a mile off. And that lack of authenticity just puts me off straight away.
Just think about that whole like new metal era, like if you think about I think about like Iron Maiden, they were enormous kind of at the start of their time. And even though they were kind of sort of much maligned during the kind of the 90s period, when Bruce had left and when Adrian had left and when kind of Blaze Bayley was on vocals and all that sort of stuff. Actually, if you kind of go back and listen to that period of albums now, Iron Maiden have always been Iron Maiden, and they didn't kind of sort of kowtow to the sort of the new metal trends of the day, and they weren't trying to be Korn or whoever, and they weren't trying to keep up with those boys. And even though they maybe kind of played smaller shows for a few years as a result, all of a sudden Brave New World comes out, and they're probably the biggest now that they've ever been.
Yeah, that's
I just think like they have always been a band, even though they've been massive, and they're probably the biggest or one of the biggest metal bands that there are. I also find them quite authentic in the sense that they've always just been a heavy metal band. They've not tried to they weren't putting like
hip hop,
rap bottoms in their albums in the 90s. Where bands even like Black Sabbath, for example, on Forbidden, had people like Ice Cube on like tracks, like The Illusion of Power on Forbidden and stuff like that. Even the greats were kind of like falling foul of the kind of the 90s period of metal. And I just think that sometimes you just have to stick to your guns and do what matters to you, and not kind of fall foul of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, look at Sepultura. Sepultura, absolute classic 80s thrash band. Get into the 90s and Bloody Roots came out, and it's all gone out the window, hasn't it?
But they have gone back to the like. Not thrash metal, but they've gone to like a sort of death metal prog route now. They've had such a weird career, Sepultura. But the newest album it's almost a bit of a return to form, but they've definitely included a lot of the death metal of today in there.
Yeah, their current drummer is unreal.
Oh, he's absolutely ridiculous.
Unbelievable.
He's like super technical and hits with 100% velocity.
Oh yeah,
it's ridiculous. Eloy
Casagrande.
Yeah, amazing drummer, incredible drummer.
And he's drumming. You just think like, how doesn't he break sticks or heads on every hit? Because it's just like 1000% commitment, isn't he?
What's amazing is like you know how like most like modern death and black metal drummers will be playing probably if you're playing the sort of speeds that he plays at, you're probably going to be at least playing with triggers for the consistency of the beats. But that guy, his pedal strokes are so fast and so hard. Even his like slave pedal, like his left foot, the velocity is as hard as a full powerful right hand stroke on his pedal at full speed. It's impressive stuff to watch.
He must eat a lot of protein powder.
Yeah. He probably has pre-workout every time he goes on stage. He sounds a bunch of pre-workout and is like, right, I'm ready, guys.
He's definitely a pre-workout, that guy, isn't he? And like,
So besides like music, then, what are your hobbies and interests outside? You know, when you're not playing in Winterfylleth, when you're not reading up on folklore, what's the interest for you guys? What do you guys do? Fun.
Well, I'd say that's probably changed and morphed over the years. So, so moving into the kind of latter period of Winterfylleth, the majority of us are fathers. So
actually, only half of us.
Only half.
Now
that Dan's left, there's only half of us that are fathers. But Simon and I are fathers. So I've got a 2-year-old, and Simon's got
5-year-old and a 3-year-old. Bluebell and Willow are 5 and 3 now, so you can probably see some of their artwork on the wall there.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I noticed that earlier.
Some potential Winterfylleth album covers there.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
And I've got a little lad, Ralph. So I don't know. I think our kind of, in the early days, obviously, you go on our Facebook pages. There's kind of reels and reels of us kind of walking together as a band and going exploring some of those places, and hiking out. And obviously, Simon's got a really big interest in kind of riding, mountain biking and kind of traveling around and doing some of those kind of interesting courses and stuff like that. So there's that kind of outdoorsy nature of the band. Whereas now I think, obviously being the father of children, my hobbies now are watching whatever will keep my son from crying on television and Disney soundtracks on vinyl, I think. So,
so the Frozen vinyl.
Yeah.
Oh God, my daughter's obsessed with Frozen. So, do you know what? As far as kids Disney stuff goes, it's not the worst one of them. It's not too bad. But yeah, I know that soundtrack way too well. But I think we all are obviously outside of our own activities musically. We're all big fans of music, as you could probably tell from the conversation that we've had this evening. We're all big sort of collectors of music, and we have like a even though we all used to live within like a couple of miles of each other, now we're a little bit more spread out, not too far. But we chat pretty much most days, like for quite a long period, just about records, vinyl, alcohol.
I think if you don't, though, you can kind of become quite out of touch with what's going on. And I worry that lots of bands who are kind of just churning albums out and who kind of do it for a job almost forget sometimes that there is music coming out and there are other things beyond, Rain in Blood that have come out since the last kind of 30 years, whatever it is, that are pushing things in interesting directions. And I don't think it's dreadful to be on top of what's going on and kind of keeping abreast of interesting and new metal albums, new NEW rather than NU.
There's certainly a lot of innovative albums coming out, and when people say that metal's dead, rock's dead, I'm just like, you're just not looking in the right places. Like, there's tons of albums every year that are coming out that are really pushing the boundaries of music.
I'd say it's probably bigger than ever nowadays. Biggest it's been since like the 80s, definitely.
I think it's hard to be a big metal band now. If I think about even when we started as a band, we were coming towards the end of when people sort of bought physical records and were kind of transitioning to that digital era. I couldn't imagine what it would be like to start a brand new band now without having the provenance of, either like the labels that we already work with other bands or kind of people knowing who we are. If you're starting a band from the ground up now, like we're on Bandcamp and buy stuff on there and follow the music press stuff. How many albums come out a week? 50? You know, and that's the big ones. You know, think about all those little artists that are kind of recording at home. You know, as much as I think it's a great thing that technologies allow people to record credibly at home and all that sort of stuff. Try be a band now; it's unbelievable.
Oh yeah, I could
How do you get
put
heard?
some input in there. I could put. I started a band recently. It's been a fucking nightmare. Like,
What sort of
it's
band
just
is it?
What's your experience of it then?
it's a bit difficult because it's like the scenes are a bit different to the point where no one's really that supportive. So like you'll get if you make friends. Like I've got friends that are in other bands. You know, they support us quite a bit. But as a whole, scenes are kind of take it as a competition, which is like a bit of an annoyance because it's like, you know, we're kind of meant to be helping each other out here. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, but then when there's probably 50 bands from your town trying to get the same support slot with whatever bands coming around whenever you're allowed to play gigs again, it becomes quite a challenging thing to kind of get heard. And I think it's only getting worse for bands to try and get their names out there, unless you somehow stumble across like being the next Ghost or something and, you know, write some kind of mainstream hit. I just think like,
mm,
you know, if I think about where we started and where we are now, the level of records we sell and the kind of presence we've had, you know, we're like 13 or 14 years down the road now, you know,
yeah,
on our seventh or eighth album, whatever, on seventh album, you know, and even still, you know, it's hard to kind of be heard amongst all those other things that are coming out. So God knows what it's going to be like for some of the other guys coming through. So I think one of our big mantras as well on a tangent is that we've always tried to at least bring some of the kind of UK bands that we like on the road with us and try and give them a platform and that kind of old cliche of try and be the person that you needed when you were at that stage, you know?
mm. Well, yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly. Because I think the most annoying part about being a band now is it's almost like you have to treat it like how you always how you want to be for the rest of your entire music career. So like when we've just finished off our first like debut track, we was in the studio. It took about 4 months of writing and then like a week in the studio to sort out. And um, now this conversation, it's kind of like instead of releasing it, it's all about marketing and how we want to appeal to people and how like our image should be. And it's just kind of shit where it's like doing it on yourself, like by yourself. It's kind of like fucking a bit daunting. Whereas like I feel like a couple years before, a lot of the focus was mainly on your music. Now it's like you know like you got about 50% focus on your music, 20% focus on your social media, 10% focus on something else, and then you know like the
I
rest
think
kind of follows.
honestly, I think it's less. Like, you know, there's a guy we know really well, a producer called Mark Minette. He did the like last My Dying Bride album, and he used to be in that band Kill
Mm,
Stitch, based out of Huddersfield Uni, funnily enough, and he's got a great studio there. Anyway, he was saying to me, which I totally agree with, and I've sort of repeated in a few interviews. He was saying that when you start a band, nobody tells you that you're actually getting into the textiles industry.
mm,
And you know, if I
Right,
think
good point.
about how much time we actually spend writing and performing in 2020 versus how much time I've spent folding vinyl into cardboard boxes and posting T-shirts and stuff like that, and you know, all the sort of other stuff that unfortunately comes along with it, making videos and you know, posting on socials and all those kind of things. It's really strange, and I think to be ahead as a band now, you're expected to be some kind of like master of marketing as well as you know, digital design and merch production and writing great records and marketing great records and then competing with the 100 bands that are coming out that week. You know, it's no joke now. And I think people just starting a band for fun, well, you know, gonna get kind of a hard reality quite quickly, I think.
well, yeah, that reality set in quite quickly because it's you have to almost treat you. I always thought, oh, it'd be fun, and then you immediately settling in. It's kind of like, okay, this is actually a business. I've basically started my own business now.
Yeah.
Like,
It's a
It's true,
rockstar
yeah.
lifestyle, they don't tell you.
Yeah, I do. You know, even though I'm not like the biggest proponent of them, you know, we've all seen the memes of like what backstage really looks like, and it's just like guys sat around staring at their phones, kind of, you know,
Eating a ham sandwich.
eating a ham sandwich, as opposed to like, you know, naked chicks and coke and you know, motley crew. So I think the reality of being in a band these days is quite a lot more practical than perhaps it ever was. You know, but you know, when you think about like when I was young, and you know, you remember people like Korn saying we spent 3 million making this record. I was like, if you can get 5 grand out of a label to make a record these days, I think you're doing well.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's like Jimmy Jaster always says when he used to do features, labels just wouldn't pay him for features, and he'd always kind of get frustrated, like, come on man, at least buy me a fucking sandwich or something. That's what he always used to say, because it's like labels now are so like, no, we know it costs this, you're gonna do it for this, and there you go. Like,
Yeah.
I
No.
think labels have obviously struggled with the adjusting to the way in which music is bought as well.
yeah, definitely.
Of course,
definitely.
like obviously that filters down to bands financially. But what, like 20 years ago, what would sell for a number one record? Number one's now a number one is like a tenth.
Yeah.
What it was in physical sales, which is probably less than that now, to be honest. So I think
We go in the charts.
yeah.
It's just so weird how like the music industry sort of changed over the years. Like vinyl's making a comeback, which luckily
Yeah, it
it's
really is.
helping.
That's
But
a great thing. That's one of the really positive things I think about uh, as a result of music being bought differently, is that there are still plenty of people that want to buy physical music, and CDs basically obviously an obsolete format now. There's no point in it.
No.
And that's what's seen that resurgence in vinyl, and that's wonderful, because it's a great format to have. You can't like, you've got a big 12-inch vinyl sleeve with artwork printed as big as that. It's you can do so much more with it aesthetically. Different color vinyl and so forth. It's a much nicer thing to spend your money on than a CD.
I think
Oh,
I think it sort of crosses over into art, doesn't it? As opposed to it just being like a marketing tool, like a CD is just like a kind of a delivery mechanism for the digital format, isn't it? Essentially.
yeah, well, I just love the fact that when I buy a vinyl, I own it. I'm supporting the band that I like, and when I get it, it's just something about, like if I come home after a stressful day at work, and I pop open, the vinyl, and I take out the case, and I just pop it down, and I just sit the little needle on there and just sit down and decompress.
It's the
It's
whole ritual
different
of the
to
thing,
click and
isn't it?
play,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. No, I know it can't be denied. Vinyl sounds better than any other music platform. Like better than Spotify, better than CD. Like I didn't realize until I got a vinyl player myself. There's the complete contrast between that and listening on Spotify. And now I just want to go back. Like I just want to get as many vinyls as possible just to hear how that band sounds in the vinyl format.
But we spent a lot of time over the years making and mastering and mixing albums and stuff. And we spent a lot of time with this guy Tim Turan, who runs Turan Audio, who do a lot of mastering stuff. And he's mastered everybody, Nightside Eclipse he did, and for everything from kind of Ginger Baker and Madness right through to
Status Quo.
Yeah, Status Quo, and then Winterfylleth and Emperor at the other end of it. He's done everything. And he was just saying to me that he really like laments this kind of modern digital era, the sense that you have to push things to be like maximize, like absolute maximum sort of brick wall limited, and it's all just kind of crunched digitally, and it's super compressed, and it's got to be louder than the track before it, and it's like loudness wars almost. And while obviously you want your record to have presence and the mastering to kind of add that sheen to the great mix that you've done, it got to a point with platforms like Spotify and stuff that it's just absolutely ridiculous. Like for example, even just watching TV, you go on like something like Amazon Prime, and then you flip back to Netflix something, and like one's so loud for the same level of volume, and a third of the volume. You just think like it's just this kind of like loudness wars and this kind of industrialized normalization of all music. So if you're playing things in a playlist, because nobody plays albums anymore, God forbid, that all of it's at the same level, and you can hear it when you're using it to be the background noise to whatever else you're doing, rather than enjoying it as a piece of art. So yeah, it's a whole mess, that stuff. So I'm glad Vinyl's come back, like you say, and I don't know whether it's necessarily the best way to hear it, but I think it's certainly kind of the way that the ear accepts it the best, isn't it? It's that kind of analog format, and just the kind of warmth of it, I think, and the fact that it can't have such expansive frequencies on it, so you don't get those ridiculous high trebly peaks, and you don't get those like bass troughs in it, and you just get the kind of a little bit more of the purity of the record. I think that really appeals to people, and me
Certainly.
and me as well, certainly.
Yeah, I think it's a fact of as well, like what you were saying, you know, you see it as art rather than music. It is definitely art because when you listen to a vinyl, you can't skip it. If you don't, you know, you're not that fond of a song, you can't just go skip. You've got to listen to it, and that's the thing. You listen to it the way the artist wanted you to listen to it when they made the album, and that's what's such a good thing about it. It gives me an appreciation for this album that I've listened to over 100 times and I like it, but I'm like listening to it and going, ah, shit, that flows better with that. That's why they probably ordered it in that. Do you know what I mean? It's like you listen to it how it was meant to be listened to.
That's why I'm glad that, like, you know, younger people are starting to realize that, and not to sound like some old dude, you know, I'm not, but that music is not just those few singles that are on a playlist that you put on because you want to hear, like, you know, ambient playlists because that's what you feel like today. You know, you actually kind of hear the idea, and that's why I think we've always had concepts for our albums, and we've always tried to make sure that there's a kind of ebb and flow to it, and you can play it through as one thing, and it's not just some kind of like weird contrasting set of songs that don't mean anything to each other, and that it works as a body of art. So yeah, I'm very pleased that vinyl has made a comeback, and other than the fact that I have to pack loads of it and take it to the post office every week, but otherwise.
Much to the lament of Glossop Post Office.
The fact that I know some of the post office workers better than my members of my own family is probably a telling sign of my misspent weeks.
I think we're getting to like sort of the end point of the interview. What we always like to sort of end on is sort of like, what advice would you give to a band just starting out that over years of being a band yourselves really would benefit them? You know, like what would you say? Don't do this, don't do that. Do you know what I mean?
Here's a great tip that will serve you well once we're hopefully able to play, when bands are able to play live again. When you're setting up for a show, get to know the sound engineer's name and befriend him, and be nice to him or her. Could be our sound engineer's a woman, actually. She's incredible, Hannah. And just find out their name and just be nice to them and polite. And next time you turn up at that venue, they'll treat you brilliantly.
Yeah, I think I've got two pieces of advice. Like one, I think both I've already kind of mentioned. One is try and be, you know, from my perspective as an older band now, is that I want to try and be the person that I needed when I was a young band, and you know, be available to people who want your advice. But then I think the second thing is, don't just think that writing a good album is what's going to make you big, because it ain't. You know, you could have the best record in the world, but if no fucker hears it, then it's gonna kind of drift into the sands of time. You need to be, by hook or by crook or by teaching yourself, you need to be an expert of marketing. You need to be try and create yourself an authentic aesthetic. Find someone that can design merch. Make sure you get good stuff printed, and always kind of keep consistency of your image, and you know, make sure that the stuff you're putting out is cohesive, and that you build relationships with people. I think people just expect to make a good record and labels are going to fall over themselves to sign it. But like I said, when there's 100 records coming out every week, no one's going to give a fuck about your band unless you kind of make yourself known. You know, build relationships with people that put out records. Make sure you're kind of polite to your booking agents and your PR people, and your, you know, make sure you value them, because they're doing an amazing job of trying to get you out there. And I think people forget with their egos sometimes that it's not just about the four of you, it's about the team that surrounds you, and how you are with them, and how you treat people as well. And you know, be a master of marketing and textiles as well as a songwriter, and I think that'll see you well. And yeah, good luck, because it's fucking hard out there now.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, thank you so much, guys. Loved your new album. Really hope I get to be standing in the field watching you guys at Bloodstock. So let's keep our fingers crossed that it all goes ahead of the roadmap. And yeah, wish you guys the best.
Yeah, this was absolutely great. Absolute pleasure for getting you on, guys.
Thanks, guys.
I really enjoyed this.
Thanks for having us,
Cheers.
guys. Really nice to meet you both, and thanks for having us.
No worries.
Been our pleasure.
Right.
Cheers,
See
guys.
ya.
Bye.
See you in a bit. Have a nice
Take it
day.
easy.